Tonight we're heading deep into the rain-drenched jungles of Mesoamerica, where howler monkeys screech from the canopy, vines wrap around ancient stone, and the air hums with the ghosts of a civilization that once cracked the code of time itself. This is the world of the Maya, astronomers, architects, corn obsessives, and occasional bloodletter enthusiasts. Ever wondered how a group of people with no wheels, no metal tools, and no draft animals managed to build cities that could rival ancient Rome? You're about to find out. Spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive a week here, unless you like humidity, snakes, and the looming threat of ritual decapitation. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. Always love seeing where you all are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We begin thousands of years ago, around 2000 BCE, when the first Maya were just starting to figure things out. No pyramids, no elaborate glyphs, just small farming communities carving out a living along the humid lowlands and rugged highlands of what we now call southeastern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador. They probably didn't call themselves Maya back then, by the way. That term came later, from the Spanish, who slapped it on like a post-it note for everyone who built a stepped pyramid or had an intricate calendar. In reality, these early people spoke many different languages and belonged to distinct groups. But for tonight, we're going to call them Maya, just to keep your sleepy brain from working too hard. At first, life was pretty chill. Agriculture was the name of the game, and maize, yes, good old corn, was king. They'd take those little golden kernels, grind them into masa, and make tamales, tortillas, and probably a bunch of other corn-based delights we don't have recipes for anymore. It's not an exaggeration to say their entire civilization was built on corn. To grow all that maize, early Maya communities set up near rivers and lakes. They used slash-and-burn farming techniques, which sounds dramatic, but it just means they'd clear patches of jungle, burn the brush to make the soil fertile, and hope for a good season. It worked. Mostly. Until it didn't. But we'll get to that mess later. Archaeologists have found evidence of early ceremonial centers during this time. Simple platforms, clay figurines, and even sacred caves used for rituals. That's right. Before the pyramids came the caves. The Maya believed these caves were entrances to the underworld, called Xibalba, pronounced Xibalba, which is as spooky and full of trials as it sounds. Basically, imagine the world's oldest haunted house, but with jaguars and fire rivers. By 1000 BCE, things start to scale up. Villages become towns, and those ceremonial platforms get fancier. Stone replaces clay, and temples begin to rise like birthday cakes with staircases. Trade networks sprout like jungle vines, connecting distant communities and spreading goods like jade, obsidian, cacao, and feathers that made peacocks look basic. You also start seeing the seeds of something very Maya, their obsession with the sky. They're already tracking stars and planets, trying to make sense of celestial rhythms. Venus, in particular, gets a lot of love. Why Venus? Because it's bright, moody, and occasionally vanishes, which to the Maya meant it was obviously up to something. This early period, often called the pre-classic or formative era, doesn't get as much spotlight as the later, more dramatic classic period. But trust me, it's like watching the first few seasons of a really good slow-burn series. All the groundwork is being laid: language, agriculture, belief systems, even the first hints of what would become the famous Maya calendar. And speaking of language, this is when they start developing what will become one of the most complex writing systems in the ancient world. Hieroglyphs carved into stone, painted on pottery, and later, written in books made of bark paper. If you're imagining emojis with grammar, you're not far off. One more fun fact before you drift off too far: some of the earliest large Maya sites, like Nakbi and El Mirador, are absolutely enormous. El Mirador alone had causeways connecting massive temple complexes across several kilometers. Picture this: you're hacking your way through jungle with a machete and suddenly, bam! A 72-meter pyramid looms up out of the trees. Yeah, it's that kind of place. And yet, despite all this engineering, the Maya did it without beasts of burden or the wheel. Which honestly makes the rest of us look kind of lazy. The jungle gave them what they needed: limestone for building, rivers for transport, obsidian for tools, and an endless soundtrack of frogs, parrots, and insects to remind you who's boss around here. But the jungle also took a toll. It grew fast, hid ruins, swallowed roads, and made it hard to sustain massive populations without constant work. It was like building your dream home inside a greenhouse that fights back. Still, by 500 BCE, the Maya had officially arrived. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. Religion, science, and civic life were woven together like a really tight huipil, their traditional woven shirt. Life revolved around cycles, of time, of crops, of life and death. And somewhere out there, in a thatched hut under a blanket of stars, a Maya priest was already sketching a calendar that would freak people out on YouTube over 2,000 years later. By the time we move into the heart of the pre-classic era, around 1000 BCE to 250 CE, the Maya world is no longer just scattered farming villages. Settlements have grown. Buildings stretch taller. Sacred plazas echo with ritual chants and the rhythmic stomp of dancers' feet. The world they are building is becoming more complex, more structured, and more connected, with every new generation leaving behind the quiet simplicity of the past and embracing the architecture of belief and power. At the center of it all, maize. Corn isn't just food here, it is life, spirit, story. According to the Maya creation myth, humanity itself was fashioned from ground maize, shaped by the gods in their final and successful attempt to make people who could honor them properly. To grow maize is to carry out a sacred duty. And so the Maya do, in fields carved from the forest, in the thin soils of the hills, and along carefully dug irrigation channels. The work is hard. The sun is relentless. But the harvests are enough to feed their growing cities. And cities are growing quickly. El Mirador in the Piton region of northern Guatemala becomes a sprawling ceremonial hub by around 300 BCE. Its pyramid, La Dantar, remains one of the largest by volume in the world. It rises out of the forest like a sleeping mountain, covered for centuries by vines, trees, and silence. Back then, it would have been dazzling, bright with stucco, its staircases sweeping toward the sky, painted with sacred colors and symbols. All around the Maya lowlands, centers like Nakbi, Saival, and Kaminaljuyu develop along similar lines. Each city has its own focus, its own personality. Some specialize in craftwork, others in trade or religious rituals. Yet they are all connected, through trade routes, alliances, and shared belief systems. Canoes cut through rivers. Goods move hand to hand, obsidian from the highlands, salt from the coasts, jade from the Motagua Valley. Cacao beans become so valued that they eventually serve as a kind of currency. And still the people build. They use limestone, quarried from the very ground beneath their feet, stacking it into stepped pyramids and low palaces. Stucco is shaped into masks, some enormous, depicting deities and legendary rulers. These aren't just decorative. They are stories in stone, expressions of devotion, and statements of power. The layout of these cities often reflects the cosmos itself, aligning with stars and planets, structured in such a way that moving through them feels almost like moving through a sacred calendar. With more people comes more complexity. Social hierarchies begin to crystallize. At the top, elite families who control both spiritual and earthly authority. Beneath them, skilled artisans, scribes, and traders. Below them, the farmers, builders, and laborers who support the entire system. Everyone has a role, a place, and a duty. Religious life becomes increasingly organized. Ceremonies mark the planting and harvesting of maize, the turning of seasons, the movement of the stars. Priests act as mediators between this world and the next. They read signs in the sky, interpret dreams, conduct bloodletting rituals to nourish the gods. Blood, after all, is a powerful offering, a piece of one's life given to maintain balance in the universe. These offerings are made carefully, respectfully, and often by members of the elite class. At night, the world glows with the flicker of fires in braziers. Dancers move through temple courtyards in elaborate masks, their steps echoing like heartbeat. Drums and flutes carry songs across stone. And overhead, the stars move in their ancient, predictable paths, guiding everything from when to plant corn to when to crown a new king. The Maya calendar system begins to take shape in this era. It's not just one calendar, but several, interlocking, complex, and astonishingly accurate. The Tzolk'in, a 260-day sacred calendar, works in tandem with the Hab, a 365-day solar calendar. Together, they form a larger system that repeats every 52 years. Eventually, the Maya will develop an even longer count, measuring time in spans that reach into thousands of years. For now, though, they are simply learning to measure the pulse of time with more precision than any other people in the ancient Americas. As the years pass, cities expand. Some rise to prominence, while others fade. El Mirador, so dominant for a time, declines mysteriously around 150 CE. Maybe it was political turmoil, maybe environmental pressure, or a shift in trade routes. But new centers are already taking its place. Tikal, deep in the Guatemalan lowlands, begins to grow. So do Copan and Caracol, each with their own dynasties and ambitions. The classic period is approaching. But here, in this long and careful stretch of time, we see the Maya defining who they are. Their cities reflect not just engineering skill but deep spirituality. Their food is sacred. Their rituals are intimate conversations with the divine. Their calendar is a map of time. Their art speaks of power, of myth, and of memory. The world is not static. Forests shift. Rivers flood. Villages are abandoned and new ones founded. But through it all, a distinct Maya identity takes root, one that will survive collapse, conquest, and centuries of silence. Even now, as archaeologists uncover forgotten pyramids beneath thick jungle canopies, the echoes of this age endure. As the Maya stepped into what we now call the Classic period, roughly from 250 CE to 900 CE, their world became more intricately layered, more defined by ritual, politics, and stone. This is the age most people picture when they think of the Maya. Towering pyramids, sprawling cities, and ceremonial courts alive with color, music, and the scent of incense. It is here that the Maya truly become a civilization of extraordinary depth, intellectually, artistically, and spiritually. At the center of this society stood religion. The Maya pantheon was vast, complex, and deeply tied to the natural world. Their gods governed everything, from rain and maize to sun, death, childbirth, and war. They could be benevolent or vengeful, youthful or ancient, animal-like or fully human. Many gods had dual aspects, both light and dark. Life and death were not opposites but part of the same continuous cycle, mirrored in the rise and fall of the sun, the growth and harvest of maize, and even in the lives of kings. Rituals formed the link between people and these gods. Every major event, whether it was the dedication of a temple, the birth of a royal child, or the new planting season, was marked by ceremony. These were not casual gatherings. They were solemn acts, carried out with precision and reverence. Offerings might include food, flowers, incense, precious stones, or, in more serious cases, blood. Bloodletting, in particular, was a key spiritual act. Not all sacrifices were dramatic or violent. Often, nobles and rulers performed personal blood offerings, drawing blood from their own bodies using obsidian blades, stingray spines, or knotted cords. This act, while painful, was considered noble and essential. The blood was seen as a sacred fuel, offered not in fear, but in balance. It connected humans directly to the gods and maintained harmony in the universe. Another space where ritual met spectacle was the Maya ball game, known as Pok-Tarpok. Played on long stone courts lined with sloped walls, the game was both athletic competition and religious performance. Players used their hips, elbows, and knees to keep a heavy rubber ball in motion, no hands allowed. The game could symbolize the movement of celestial bodies or the mythic struggle between life and death. And while not every match ended in sacrifice, the most important ones sometimes did, particularly if they were part of a ceremonial event or celebration. These courts were often positioned beside temples or palace complexes. They were public places, where entire communities could gather, watch, and take part in the rhythm of ritual life. Across the Maya world, these court spaces, surrounded by stone glyphs and royal stelae, spoke not only of sport but of identity, politics, and belief. The architecture of the time reflected this deep integration of spiritual and social life. Temples were often built in layers, with new structures placed directly atop older ones. This created towering pyramids that rose above city centers, their summits reserved for rituals and observances. Staircases were steep and narrow, guiding both feet and the spirit upward toward the divine. These structures were not just practical, they were symbolic. The pyramid mirrored the sacred mountain, a place of creation. Its steps could represent the journey between worlds. The buildings were oriented with incredible precision, aligned to solstices, equinoxes, and the rising of planets like Venus. The Maya were not simply building for shelter or prestige. They were constructing sacred landscapes, where every stone had meaning. Art and writing flourished during this period as well. Walls and pottery were covered in scenes of court life, mythology, and warfare. Scribes wrote in intricate glyphs, each a combination of syllables and symbols, that recorded not just events, but thoughts, prayers, and poetry. These texts adorned stelae, altars, staircases, and books, called codices, made from fig tree bark. Most of those books were tragically lost during the Spanish conquest, but a few remain, offering a glimpse into how the Maya saw the world. Rulers took center stage in both artwork and writing. They were not simply political leaders, but mediators between heaven and earth. Their lives were marked by ritual obligations, including fasting, bloodletting, and elaborate ceremonies. They wore richly embroidered garments, headdresses of jade and quetzal feathers, and carried scepters shaped like gods. Their power was hereditary but also deeply spiritual. To rule was to maintain the balance between worlds. We can see this clearly in the stories carved into stone at sites like Copan, Palenque, and Tikal. Each city tells its own story of kings and queens, of dynastic alliances and rivalries, of births, wars, and sacred events timed with celestial movements. Some kings reigned for decades, others ruled briefly before being overthrown or eclipsed. Yet all were remembered, in glyphs, in murals, in the quiet shadow of stone monuments still standing today. Across this complex and carefully ordered world, the Maya wove together time, belief, and nature. Their gods lived in caves and mountains, rivers, and stars. Their ceremonies were both acts of devotion and public affirmations of cosmic order. Their cities were mirrors of the heavens, designed not just for power, but for harmony. This was the Maya at their most confident: builders, thinkers, storytellers, and keepers of time. And though the world around them would continue to shift, this era laid the foundation for everything that would come after. One of the most remarkable achievements of the Maya civilization is their system of writing, a complex, beautiful script made up of hundreds of glyphs. These weren't just letters. Each glyph could represent a whole word or a syllable, and they were often combined in creative ways to express not just meaning, but emotion, tone, and nuance. This wasn't a writing system meant only for administration or lists. The Maya used it for poetry, for prayer, for history, and prophecy. It was art as much as communication. Their glyphs curled like vines, stacked like stones, and flowed across pottery, temple walls, and stone stelae with a rhythm that feels almost musical. By around 250 CE, writing had become a central part of Maya elite life. Every major event, births, accessions to power, temple dedications, battles, was carved into stone and placed in the open, often at the base of towering pyramids or along processional walkways. The glyphs didn't just record the event. They placed it in time, using a detailed calendar system, and often aligned it with significant celestial events. To read a Maya inscription is to see how intimately history, time, and the cosmos were intertwined. Maya scribes, called ajtzib in many Maya languages, held a respected role in society. They were highly trained, likely born into noble families, and educated from a young age in the complexities of the script and the calendar. These scribes often appear in murals and carvings holding ink pots and styluses, sometimes seated beside kings, recording the moment as it happened. Many wrote not just on stone or pottery, but on codices, books made of long strips of bark paper, folded accordion style and coated in a thin layer of white lime. These books were painted with bright mineral pigments, reds, blues, blacks, and covered everything from astronomy and medicine to ritual practices and genealogies. Sadly, most of these books were destroyed in the 16th century during the Spanish conquest. Only 4 confirmed Maya codices survive today, but they remain priceless windows into how the Maya saw the world. Reading these texts, both ancient and surviving, requires not just linguistic skill but also a deep understanding of the Maya worldview. Their writing does not move in straight lines, it wraps and layers itself, often weaving myth and history together in a single sentence. A battle might be recorded not just as a military event, but as a reenactment of a divine conflict. A king's birth might be placed in relation to the last appearance of Venus or the cycle of a sacred calendar round. Time, for the Maya, was not a flat line, but a circle, or more accurately, a set of interlocking cycles. Their calendar system reflected this philosophy. The Tzolk'in, a 260-day sacred calendar, ran alongside the Hab, a 365-day solar calendar. Every day had both a Tzolk'in and a Hab designation, creating a unique date that wouldn't repeat for 52 years. This calendar round was used for most ceremonial and civil purposes. But beyond that, the Maya tracked time on a much grander scale. Their long count calendar allowed them to pinpoint dates thousands of years in the past or future. A single date might look like 9.15.13.0.7, representing a count of days since a mythical starting point in 3114 BCE, what the Maya saw as the beginning of the current world age. This level of timekeeping is astonishing. With no telescopes, no metal instruments, the Maya were able to predict eclipses, trace the cycles of Venus, and align their buildings to solstices and equinoxes with near-perfect precision. Time wasn't abstract for them, it was a living force, one that moved with the stars and affected every part of life. Temples and pyramids were often built to reflect these ideas. At places like Köpen and Palenque, staircases are inscribed with calendar dates. Entire buildings are oriented so that sunlight will strike a certain stone only on the day of a solstice or equinox. Rituals, royal accessions, even wars were planned around these celestial movements. The calendar didn't just measure time, it gave it meaning. Art and writing also served as tools of power. A king who could trace his lineage back hundreds of years, using recorded dates and glyphs, had a divine legitimacy. A ruler who could time his reign with the arrival of Venus or the completion of a major cycle appeared chosen by the cosmos itself. These weren't just rulers, they were living symbols of order in a universe that constantly cycled through birth, death, and renewal. It's easy to think of writing and calendar making as academic or dry. But in the Maya world, they were deeply human acts. A scribe carving a glyph into stone was preserving memory. A priest reading the stars was planning when a community should sow its crops or hold its most sacred ceremonies. A ruler inscribing his deeds on a stela was offering his life as part of the larger rhythm of the cosmos. And this rhythm pulsed through everything, from the slow arc of the sun across the sky to the steady hand of a young scribe dipping brush to ink, recording the moment for centuries yet to come. By the time the Classic period was in full swing, roughly between 300 and 800 CE, the Maya world had grown into a rich tapestry of powerful city-states, each with its own rulers, deities, and histories. Unlike the centralized empires of the Aztecs or the Inca, the Maya were never one unified kingdom. Instead, they lived in a political landscape more like a quilt, colorful, overlapping, and stitched together by alliances, rivalries, and centuries of dynastic ambition. Each city-state functioned as an independent kingdom, ruled by its own Keuhula, a term often translated as Holy Lord or Divine King. These rulers were not simply administrative figures. They were considered the living embodiment of their city's patron gods. When a Maya king spoke, he spoke not just as a man, but as a sacred voice for the spirit world. His responsibilities were vast, managing war and diplomacy, overseeing rituals, keeping the calendar in alignment with the cosmos, and ensuring the agricultural cycle stayed in harmony. Some city-states became dominant regional powers. Tikal, nestled in the Guatemalan lowlands, rose early and expanded quickly, spreading its influence through military conquest, trade networks, and royal marriage. Köpen, located near present-day Honduras, became a center for innovation in art and astronomy. Palenque, in the Chiapas highlands of Mexico, was known for its elegance, graceful temples, poetic inscriptions, and one of the most famous kings in Maya history, Pakal, who reigned for over 60 years. But power was rarely unchallenged. Maya politics was dynamic, even volatile. Cities formed alliances through intermarriage between royal families, but those alliances could shift overnight. War was common, and while it rarely involved mass slaughter or large armies, it was highly ritualized and deeply symbolic. Capturing a rival noble or king was often more important than winning territory. Prisoners of high rank might be sacrificed in elaborate ceremonies, their fate sealed not just by politics but by sacred duty. Diplomacy was as much about appearance as it was about negotiation. Kings and queens used monumental architecture to project strength, raising new temples, carving stele with elaborate inscriptions, and commissioning sprawling palace complexes adorned with finely carved masks and painted murals. Every building, every glyph, every sculpture was a declaration. We are powerful. We are sacred. We belong here. Queens also held significant roles. While male rulers were more common, many royal women served as powerful figures in their own right, sometimes as regents, sometimes as co-rulers, and occasionally as queens in their own name. Women participated in rituals, bloodletting, and diplomacy. They appear in artwork and inscriptions not as background figures, but as active agents shaping the fate of their cities. Court life was highly ceremonial. Rulers and nobles adorned themselves in jade jewelry, intricate textiles, and headdresses of feathers and shell. Ceremonies took place in open plazas and on temple summits, surrounded by watching crowds. Musicians played drums, trumpets, and turtle-shell percussion instruments. Dancers moved in time with the rituals, masked as gods or spirits, blurring the line between the human and the divine. These cities, though built of stone, were vibrant and alive. Markets buzzed with trade. Scribes recorded history. Priests tended sacred fires. Children learned to weave, to farm, to observe the movements of stars. It was a world with layers of meaning, every object, every moment touched by spiritual significance. Despite their independence, these city-states were deeply connected. Trade routes crisscrossed the region, moving obsidian, jade, cacao, cotton, salt, feathers, honey, and finely crafted ceramics. Merchants traveled by foot and by canoe, carrying not just goods but ideas, stories, songs, rituals, and languages. Across hundreds of miles, a shared culture emerged. Temples with familiar layouts, myths that echoed each other, calendars that beat with the same rhythm. Yet this world was not without tension. Competition between city-states created constant friction. Some cities grew strong by controlling resources or key trade routes. Others declined, whether from defeat in war, shifts in climate, or internal instability. Power was not permanent. A city like Tikal might rise for centuries, only to fall into silence as another, like Karakol or Calakmul, ascended in its place. This complex web of politics and ritual kept the Maya world in motion. No one city could dominate for long. No ruler reigned without challenge. And yet, through it all, the culture remained vibrant. Temples continued to rise. Glyphs continued to be carved. The calendar continued to turn. There was no single capital of the Maya world, no one king who ruled them all. But in the plazas of dozens of cities, large and small, the people watched their rulers climb the steps of sacred temples, offer their blood to the gods, and promise that, for now, the balance of the world had been kept. Among the many rivalries that shaped the classic Maya world, none was more dramatic or enduring than the struggle between Tikal and Calakmul. These two great powers, one rising from the forests of northern Guatemala, the other commanding the lowlands of southern Campeche, stood at the heart of a centuries-long contest for supremacy. Their story is not just one of war and politics, it is a window into how power worked in the Maya world, shifting, fragile, and often cloaked in ritual. Tikal, with its soaring pyramids and far-reaching influence, was one of the earliest dominant city-states. By the mid-4th century CE, it had already established itself as a regional heavyweight. Its rulers were ambitious, skilled in warfare, and well-connected through diplomatic marriages. At its peak, Tikal controlled a wide network of smaller towns and outposts, bound together by trade, tribute, and ideology. But power attracts challengers. Calakmul, nestled in the dense forests to the north, rose in opposition. By the 6th century CE, it had grown into one of the largest and most sophisticated Maya cities ever built. Its name, translated from the Maya language, means City of the Two Pyramids, a reference to its twin temple complexes, which towered over the jungle canopy like silent sentinels. Calakmul wasn't just a rival, it was a match for Tikal in nearly every way. What followed was a long and intricate power struggle, marked by alliances, betrayals, battles, and political maneuvering. Historians and archaeologists often refer to it as the Maya superpower conflict. Unlike modern wars, it wasn't a single, drawn-out battlefront. Instead, it unfolded through a series of regional confrontations, each city maneuvering to outflank the other by forming strategic partnerships with third-party city-states. Calakmul built a powerful alliance known as the Snake Kingdom, named after the serpent emblem glyph used by its kings. This alliance stretched across much of the Maya lowlands and included influential cities like Zybanch and Karakol. Together, they worked to encircle Tikal, cut off its trade routes, and weaken its control over the region. The conflict reached a turning point in 562 CE, when Calakmul and its allies delivered a major blow to Tikal. The event is known from inscriptions as a Star War, a term believed to refer to a specific kind of warfare, often timed with astronomical events. Tikal's ruling dynasty was disrupted, and for over a century, the city entered a period of silence. Few monuments were erected. The record grows quiet. In the Maya world, this was a sign of serious instability. But Tikal did not disappear. Over the following decades, it rebuilt. New alliances were forged, new leaders rose. By the early 7th century, under a ruler named Jasor Chan Ka Wilai, Tikal struck back. In 695 CE, they defeated Calakmul in a decisive battle, reclaiming their place as a leading force in the region. Reliefs and stelae from this period show victorious kings in ceremonial regalia, while captive enemies are bound at their feet. Yet even with these victories, neither city could truly eliminate the other. Power shifted, but balance returned. Both cities continued to grow and build. Their rivalry became a cycle of dominance, decline, and resurgence. It shaped the political map of the Maya world for generations. Beyond the battlefield, the rivalry also spurred remarkable achievements in architecture, art, and astronomy. Tikal and Calakmul each sought to outshine the other, not just with military strength, but with cultural brilliance. They expanded their ceremonial centers, commissioned intricate carvings, and developed increasingly precise calendar systems. The competition was as much intellectual and spiritual as it was strategic. Calakmul's Great Plaza, flanked by twin pyramids and lined with dozens of stelae, stood as a powerful stage for royal ceremonies. Tikal responded with its own towering temples, including Temple I and Temple II, facing each other across the city's central plaza, reaching toward the sky like arms in prayer. This rivalry was never just about ego. In the Maya worldview, kings were responsible for cosmic balance. A defeat in war was not only a political failure but a sign that the gods had withdrawn their favor. A victorious ruler, meanwhile, was seen as a conduit for divine power, someone who had successfully realigned their city with the universe. The story of Tikal and Calakmul reminds us how intertwined politics, religion, and the natural world were in Maya thought. Every alliance was sacred, every battle a reenactment of myth, every victory a sign from the heavens. Their struggle did not leave behind great empires in the traditional sense, but it did produce some of the most sophisticated urban centers, ritual practices, and intellectual achievements of the Maya world. And even now, as archaeologists continue to excavate the jungle-covered ruins of Calakmul and restore the towering pyramids of Tikal, the echoes of this ancient rivalry still linger, carved into stone, written in glyphs, and waiting patiently to be remembered. While kings and dynasties battled for power in plazas and temples, life for most Maya people unfolded in quieter, steadier rhythms. Away from the royal courts and ceremonial centers, families lived in modest homes made of wood, thatch, and packed earth. These houses, often arranged in small clusters around a shared courtyard, formed the building blocks of Maya neighborhoods and villages. Here, daily life was rooted in tradition, in family ties, and in the cycles of the natural world. Agriculture was central to everything. Most people were farmers, and the land was both sustenance and sacred. Maize, as always, was the heart of the diet and the spirit. But the Maya also cultivated beans, squash, chili peppers, avocados, cacao, and cotton. The classic three sisters of Mesoamerican farming, maize, beans, and squash, grew well together, each plant supporting the other's growth. Farmers used a variety of techniques, including slash-and-burn methods in the lowlands and terracing in the highlands, to adapt to the challenging terrain and unpredictable rainfall. The work was hard, especially in the hot, humid climate. But it was also deeply meaningful. Planting and harvesting were tied to religious festivals, timed according to the sacred calendar. Rituals were performed to bless the fields and thank the gods for their bounty. Even tools and seeds were sometimes given offerings, symbolic gestures to maintain balance between people and the natural world. Within the home, much of the daily activity revolved around the komel, a clay griddle placed over a fire, where maize dough was pressed and cooked into tortillas. Women ground the corn using methods, large stone slabs with handheld grinders, a task that took hours and considerable strength. This daily rhythm, grinding, preparing, feeding, was essential, both for nourishment and for the continuation of tradition. Children helped where they could. Boys learned farming, hunting, and sometimes specialized crafts from their fathers. Girls were taught to weave, cook, and care for younger siblings. But education also extended beyond the home. In some cities, young members of noble families were taught by scribes and priests, learning glyphs, history, calendar cycles, and the skills needed for leadership or service to the temples. Artisans played a crucial role in society. Skilled in pottery, weaving, carving, and painting, they created both everyday items and sacred objects. Their work ranged from the purely functional, simple clay bowls and woven mats, to the ceremonial, elaborately painted vases, intricately carved jade jewelry, and textiles dyed with rich reds and indigos. Much of their art carried religious symbolism, linking even the most basic objects to the stories and structure of the cosmos. Markets were lively centers of trade and social life. Held in open plazas, these markets brought together farmers, craftsmen, and merchants from across the region. Goods were bartered, there was no standard coin, but cacao beans, salt, and obsidian often served as mediums of exchange. Alongside practical items, markets also offered luxury goods, polished shells, brightly colored feathers, and finely crafted ornaments for the elite. Though we often focus on the monumental side of Maya culture, it's in these everyday spaces that the deeper roots of their civilization lie. Community gatherings, shared meals, local rituals, these moments sustained the cultural fabric. People told stories, played music, passed on knowledge. They watched the stars and marked the seasons, just as their ancestors had done for generations. Religion, too, was a part of daily life. Small household shrines were common, where families made offerings of food, incense, or flowers to ancestors and local gods. Births, marriages, and deaths were marked with rituals led by local priests or community elders. Dreams, illnesses, and unusual events were seen as messages from the spirit world, requiring attention and interpretation. The natural environment shaped every part of Maya life. The jungle was both provider and danger, offering food, medicine, and raw materials, while also harboring snakes, jaguars, and the ever-present risk of drought. Rivers and cenotes, or natural sinkholes, provided water and were also seen as sacred gateways to the underworld. Mountains were the bones of the gods. Trees, especially the great saber, were seen as the axis of the universe, connecting the sky, the earth, and the world below. Even time itself was felt differently. The calendars, those complex systems tracked by priests and scribes, were not distant or abstract. They shaped the rhythm of village life. Each day had a spiritual character, a particular energy. People planned marriages, trips, or harvests according to the qualities of the day. Time was not just something that passed, it was a presence, a partner, sometimes a warning, sometimes a guide. Despite the growing power of cities like Tikal and Calakmul, most Maya lived lives of remarkable continuity. Political shifts and royal wars might echo from afar, but the world of the farmer, the artisan, the mother, the elder, this world remained steady. It moved with the sun and stars, with the planting season, and with the stories passed from one voice to another. These were the quiet architects of Maya culture. Their hands shaped the tools, raised the children, tended the fires. And through their labor and love, they carried forward a civilization that thrived not only in stone and script, but in the rhythms of ordinary life. As the Classic period entered its final centuries, around 750 to 900 CE, the great cities of the southern lowlands were reaching the height of their complexity. Towering pyramids loomed over dense jungles. Palaces stretched out in wide stone corridors. Courtyards echoed with ceremonies, courtly performances, and the steps of dignitaries. The calendar continued to turn, monuments were still being raised, and royal dynasties traced their lineages deeper into the past. Yet beneath the surface, something had begun to shift. This period is often referred to as the Terminal Classic, and while the name suggests a sudden end, the truth is more gradual and complex. Over the span of a few generations, many of the most prominent Maya cities in the southern lowlands, including Tikal, Köpen, Palenque, and Calakmul, experienced significant decline. Some were abandoned entirely. Others lost their political dominance, their temples and palaces left to crumble beneath growing vines. What caused this unraveling? There is no single answer, no great invasion, no cataclysmic war that brought everything down in an instant. Instead, historians and archaeologists now believe the decline was the result of multiple overlapping factors. Political instability, environmental pressure, overpopulation, drought, shifting trade routes, internal conflict. In many ways, the Maya had built a civilization so interconnected, so finely tuned, that when a few key systems began to fail, the consequences rippled outward. Evidence from lake beds and sediment cores suggests that the southern lowlands experienced a series of severe droughts during this period. For a society so dependent on seasonal rains for agriculture and drinking water, this was devastating. Reservoirs dried. Crops failed. People went hungry. In areas without reliable water storage or irrigation systems, communities would have been forced to abandon their homes in search of more stable conditions. This environmental stress was layered on top of an already fragile political structure. The Maya system of independent city-states meant that when one dynasty fell, there was no central government to offer support or coordination. Instead, rivalries intensified. More stele from this period show scenes of warfare and conquest, even among previously allied cities. Political alliances crumbled. Smaller cities were absorbed or destroyed. And with every upheaval, the ability to manage food distribution, organize labor, and perform large-scale ritual construction declined. The elite class, which had once held society together through religious authority and dynastic continuity, found itself increasingly isolated. Temples and palaces were still being built in some places, but they were smaller, less ornate, less frequently maintained. Inscriptions that once recorded lavish ceremonies and stable rule began to disappear. Glyph writing slowed. Public monuments ceased. The long dialogue between ruler, people, and gods fell silent in city after city. Archaeological evidence suggests that in some places, people did not vanish entirely, they simply moved. Families left the ceremonial centers and resettled in smaller villages, more sustainable for their needs. Rather than collapse in total, many regions experienced a kind of social transformation. Power shifted away from the massive urban cores toward more rural, community-based systems. In a sense, the Maya world decentralized. This is why we now avoid calling it a collapse in the old sense. The civilization did not end. Maya culture, language, and identity continued, just in different forms and places. But for the southern lowlands, this period marked the end of an era. Still, not all regions suffered equally. While cities like Tikal and Calakmul declined, others in the northern Yucatan were just beginning to rise. Sites like Uxmal, Edzna, and most famously Chichen Itza began to flourish. These cities had different architectural styles, different trade networks, and were situated in more arid but hydrologically manageable landscapes. They drew from the traditions of the classic period, but also introduced new ideas and influences. In many ways, this shift was both an ending and a beginning. The grand, ceremonial city-states of the southern lowlands faded into memory. But the Maya themselves continued, adapting, moving, and building in new forms. It's easy to imagine this period as filled with silence and decay. But in reality, it was also a time of resilience. Even as kings lost power and temples crumbled, ordinary people continued to farm, to pray, to share stories and keep their calendars. The rhythms of daily life persisted, even as the great stones around them began to crack and lean under the weight of time. And through it all, the jungle slowly returned. Trees pushed through abandoned plazas. Roots curled around fallen stele. Birds and insects reclaimed what had once been palaces. In time, whole cities disappeared beneath the canopy, hidden, but not gone. Hundreds of years later, when explorers and archaeologists began to rediscover these lost cities, they would find not ruins of a forgotten people, but the layered remains of a civilization that had once watched the stars, spoken to gods, and measured time in cycles longer than empires. A civilization that endured through drought and decline not because of kings or temples, but because of the deep roots planted by its people. With the decline of the great southern lowland centers, attention turned north, to the Yucatan Peninsula, where new powers were rising. The most famous of these was Chichen Itza, a city that, between 900 and 1200 CE, would grow into one of the most influential and iconic centers in the Maya world. If the classic period had been defined by dozens of city-states competing for dominance, this new age brought a different kind of energy: fusion, experimentation, and change. Chichen Itza wasn't just a Maya city, it was a crossroads. Its architecture, art, and even language bear traces of outside influence, especially from the Toltecs, a powerful culture from central Mexico. Whether these connections came from trade, migration, or conquest remains debated. But what's clear is that Chichen Itza became a melting pot, absorbing ideas from across Mesoamerica and reshaping them into something new. The city itself was grand. At its heart stood El Castillo, also known as the Temple of Kukulkan, a stepped pyramid with an astronomical secret. Each of its 4 sides has 91 steps, which, when combined with the top platform, total 365, the number of days in a solar year. And during the spring and fall equinoxes, a shadow serpent appears to slither down the side of the staircase as the sun sets. It's a masterpiece of engineering, astronomy, and symbolism, all wrapped into a single monument. Nearby, the Great Ball Court stretched over 150 meters long, the largest known in the Maya world. Its towering stone walls were carved with scenes of players, rituals, and, in some cases, sacrifice. Unlike earlier ball courts, this one amplified sound in ways that still puzzle scientists. Whispers can travel the length of the field, and a single clap at the base of El Castillo echoes like a heartbeat. This period is sometimes called the post-classic, though that label can be misleading. It suggests decline, when in reality, it was a time of continued innovation. Maya culture remained vibrant, just different. The political structure had changed. Instead of divine kings ruling from isolated jungle cities, Chichen Itza appears to have been governed by a council or confederation, with shared power among elite lineages. Temples and pyramids still stood at the city's heart, but markets, workshops, and urban neighborhoods expanded around them. Trade flourished on a scale not previously seen. Chichen Itza became a major commercial hub, linking the interior of the Yucatan with coastal ports like Xcaret, Tulum, and Champerton. Canoes crossed the Caribbean, connecting the Maya with people as far as Honduras, Belize, and what is now the Gulf Coast of Mexico. Salt, obsidian, cacao, cotton, honey, and turquoise flowed through these networks, along with ideas, deities, and stories. Religious life also evolved. Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god, became a central figure in Chichen Itza's spiritual pantheon. Closely related to the central Mexican deity Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan embodied wind, learning, and fertility. Temples to him were adorned with serpents and warriors, linking the divine to both natural forces and human ambition. Another dramatic feature of Chichen Itza was the sacred cenote, a deep natural sinkhole believed to be a portal to the underworld. Archaeologists have recovered gold, jade, incense, and human remains from its depths. Ritual offerings, sometimes including people, were made here in moments of crisis or devotion. The cenote connected the city not just to water, but to spiritual realms. In Maya belief, cenotes were not only life-giving sources but sacred spaces where the world above met the world below. Chichen Itza's influence spread far. Its architectural style, known as pupchens, inspired smaller cities across the northern Yucatan. Towns like Uxmal, Caba, and Labna also flourished, each with its own artistic voice but shaped by a common regional aesthetic. Elaborate mosaics, stacked stone masks, and precisely cut blocks that needed no mortar. These northern cities lacked the towering verticality of Tikal or Calakmul but compensated with intricate detail, symmetrical design, and visual storytelling. However, even this golden age had its limits. By the late 1100s or early 1200s, Chichen Itza began to decline. Once again, the reasons remain uncertain. It could have been political instability, internal conflict, drought, or a shift in trade routes. Whatever the cause, power passed to new centers, especially Mayapan, a walled city that came to dominate the Yucatan in the following century. But Chichen Itza didn't vanish. pilgrims still visited its sacred sites. Its buildings remained landmarks, and its name endured in oral traditions and later historical chronicles. The structures stood tall, stone bones against the sky, long after the last ruler's voice had faded. The post-classic was not a lesser version of Maya civilization. It was a reinvention. It kept the heartbeat of older traditions while adapting to new conditions. City planning evolved. Beliefs shifted. Political systems diversified. But the deep connection to land, to cycles, and to sacred time remained. In many ways, Chichen Itza represents a civilization that was not collapsing, but transforming, finding new forms, new alliances, and new ways of understanding the universe. As the power of Chichen Itza faded in the 1200s, the Maya world experienced yet another shift. This time, the center of influence moved to Mayapan, a walled city located further inland on the Yucatan Peninsula. For roughly 2 centuries, from about 1200 to 1450 CE, Mayapan served as the political and ceremonial heart of the northern Maya, carrying forward many of the traditions of earlier cities while adapting to the realities of a changing world. Unlike the grand openness of Chichen Itza, Mayapan was more compact and fortified. A massive stone wall encircled the city, suggesting that internal threats, perhaps from rival factions or former allies, were very real. Within these walls lived not only nobles and priests but a large population of commoners, artisans, and farmers. Estimates suggest the city may have held as many as 15,000 people at its peak, making it one of the most densely populated Maya sites of its time. The political system of Mayapan was different, too. Instead of being ruled by a single powerful king, the city appears to have been governed by a council of noble families. This confederation shared authority, creating a kind of oligarchy in which multiple lineages had a voice in decision-making. It was an adaptation to the fractured political landscape of the time, a way to hold power while avoiding the pitfalls of dynastic rivalry. Still, this wasn't a peaceful utopia. The historical record and later chronicles speak of internal dissent, betrayals, and simmering tensions between families. One of the most prominent lineages, the Kokum, is said to have wielded considerable influence, and ultimately sparked rebellion through abuses of power. By the mid-15th century, violence erupted. Mayapan was abandoned, its buildings looted or burned, its people dispersed. Yet despite this, the Maya world did not disappear. With the fall of Mayapan, power fragmented again into dozens of smaller city-states, each with its own identity and leadership. These were known as Kuchkabalab, and each was headed by a Halak or chief. Some of the more powerful among them included Mani, Satuta, Tulam, and Itzamal. These city-states were often in competition, forming and breaking alliances, trading goods, and sometimes engaging in warfare. But they also continued many of the deep-rooted practices that defined Maya culture: ritual calendar observances, ancestor veneration, and a continued reverence for the natural world. Even without massive temples or imperial rule, the spiritual rhythm of Maya life endured. Daily life during this late post-classic period was not so different from what it had been centuries earlier. People still grew maize, beans, and squash. They fished in the coastal shallows and collected salt from drying pans. Artisans continued to create pottery, weave textiles, and carve shell and bone into jewelry. Markets still bustled with traders carrying cacao, obsidian, and feathers from region to region. And religious life remained vibrant, focused now on smaller shrines, household rituals, and regional ceremonies. Some cities, like Tulam, built on cliffs overlooking the Caribbean Sea, grew prosperous by controlling coastal trade routes. Others, such as Uxmal and Izamal, remained centers of pilgrimage. These sites became living archives of Maya spirituality, visited by people from distant towns who still felt connected to the sacred landscapes and legends of their ancestors. The Maya also remained keen observers of the sky. Though the large observatories of the classic period were no longer being built, knowledge of celestial movements continued. Priests and daykeepers still tracked Venus cycles, eclipses, and solstices, using them to guide planting seasons, festivals, and rituals. The calendar, with its complex interlocking systems, was still used to mark time and read omens. Language, too, remained strong. Dozens of Maya languages continue to be spoken across the region, each rooted in the same deep cultural soil. These languages carried with them not only practical communication, but songs, prayers, origin stories, and historical memory. In many communities, they were the heartbeat of identity. And through all this, the Maya adapted. They had lived through the fall of great cities, the drying of lakes, the rise and fall of dynasties. They had restructured their political systems, moved their populations, and shifted their alliances. But they had never lost the threads that held their world together. By the 15th century, the Maya were no longer builders of massive stone cities, but they were still very much alive, culturally, spiritually, and politically. Their society had changed shape, becoming more decentralized, more grounded in local traditions and leadership. And in some ways, this made it more resilient. But a new threat was coming, one unlike any the Maya had ever faced. From across the sea, new ships were beginning to appear on the horizon, carrying new languages, new weapons, and a very different worldview. The Spanish were arriving. And while the Maya could not have known it, their next chapter would be the most difficult of all. The 16th century began like many others in the Maya world. Local leaders governed independent towns, markets thrived, fields were planted, and the old calendars still guided ritual and timekeeping. But on the coasts, something strange had begun to happen. Sailors from across the sea had arrived, first in small numbers, then with growing frequency. They came with armor, crosses, muskets, and languages no one had heard before. The Spanish conquest of the Maya was not a single campaign. It unfolded over nearly 2 centuries, piece by piece, town by town. Unlike the Aztec or Inca empires, which had centralized capitals that could be toppled quickly, the Maya lived in hundreds of independent settlements across dense forests, mountains, and coastlines. There was no single king to defeat, no unified front to break. The Maya resistance would prove long, fierce, and deeply rooted. The first major contact came in 1511, when a Spanish shipwreck left a small group of survivors stranded on the Yucatan coast. Most died, but 2 men survived, Geronimo de Ogalar and Gonzalo Guerrero. While Ogalar would later join Hernan Cortés and act as a translator, Guerrero chose a different path. He integrated into Maya society, married a local woman, and rose to the rank of Nakam, or war leader. When the Spanish returned years later, Guerrero fought against them. His descendants, part Spanish and part Maya, would come to symbolize both cultural blending and resistance. Then came Francisco de Montejo, a Spanish noble who set out to conquer the Yucatan in the 1520s. His efforts were met with fierce opposition. Cities like Mani, Satuta, and Chetumal resisted him at every step. Dense forests, unfamiliar terrain, and a lack of central leadership frustrated the Spanish efforts. Battles were brutal. At times, entire settlements vanished into the jungle rather than surrender. Montejo's son, Francisco de Montejo the Younger, continued the campaign and eventually founded Mérida in 1542, built atop the ruins of the Maya city of Tijo. From there, the Spanish launched wave after wave of expeditions. Conquest wasn't only military, it was also cultural. Missionaries arrived, determined to convert the Maya to Christianity. Idols were burned. Temples were torn down. In their place, churches were built using the same stones, but layered with a new faith. Resistance never fully ended. In some regions, the Maya staged coordinated uprisings. In others, they simply withdrew, fleeing into the forest, maintaining their rituals in secret, keeping their language and customs alive out of sight. In the Piton region, far to the south, the last independent Maya kingdom, Tayasal, held out until 1697, over 150 years after the fall of the Aztec capital. But conquest brought more than soldiers and priests. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza spread through the Maya population, devastating communities that had no natural immunity. In some areas, up to 90% of the population died within a few decades. It was a silent, invisible invasion, one that no weapon could stop. And yet, through this immense trauma, the Maya persisted. Many adapted to new realities. They learned Spanish. Some accepted baptism while maintaining older beliefs in private. Others resisted by preserving their stories, rituals, and language in hidden ways. Priests and scribes who once wrote in glyphs began recording traditions using the Latin alphabet. This gave rise to texts like the Popol Vuh, a mythic narrative of creation, gods, and heroes. which, though written after the conquest, preserves the core of pre-Hispanic Maya belief. In rural villages, people kept planting maize in the old ways. They continued to observe sacred days, perform rituals, and speak Maya languages, despite pressure to forget. Family shrines remained, though they were often disguised under Christian icons. Even in public festivals, echoes of ancient deities and customs lingered, wrapped in layers of colonial ritual. Not all Spanish efforts to erase Maya culture were successful. In fact, some had the opposite effect. One infamous example was Diego de Landa, a Franciscan friar who, in 1562, ordered the destruction of hundreds of Maya codices and idols in the town of Mani. He saw them as works of the devil. And yet, years later, he wrote a detailed account of Maya life, rituals, and language, creating one of the most important early records of Maya culture and writing. His work, the Relation de las Cosas de Yucatán, would become a key tool in the modern deciphering of Maya glyphs. The conquest period is often remembered as a collapse, but it is more accurately described as a collision. Two worlds collided, one indigenous and ancient, the other European and expansionist. The result was not one replacing the other, but something more tangled. A long, painful process of negotiation, resistance, and survival. The Maya didn't disappear. They endured. Their cities might have been buried or repurposed, their rituals pushed underground, their languages threatened, but the people themselves remained. Generation after generation, they held on to identity, memory, and tradition. Often quietly, often invisibly, but always with a fierce sense of continuity. And through this time, the land itself, so deeply tied to Maya identity, remained. The cenotes still glimmered. The mountains still stood. The sun still rose in its familiar arc across the sky. The cosmos turned, just as it always had. By the dawn of the 18th century, the Spanish crown had declared much of the Yucatan under its control. Churches stood where pyramids had once dominated, Spanish laws governed daily life, and Maya communities paid tribute in labor and goods. But beneath the surface, the old world had not entirely vanished. In small villages and remote mountain valleys, the Maya quietly maintained their cultural identity. They had not stopped being Maya, they had simply learned how to survive. Colonial rule brought profound changes. Land, once communally held by Maya lineages, was gradually appropriated into haciendas, large estates controlled by Spanish settlers or local elites. Many Maya were forced into debt peonage, laboring in the fields for meager wages and little freedom. Crops shifted from subsistence staples like maize to export goods such as sugar, henequen, and cattle. For much of the Maya population, the colonial economy meant long days of hard work under someone else's control. Religious life, too, entered a complicated phase. The Catholic Church was a powerful presence, building elaborate missions and establishing a network of priests, friars, and brotherhoods across the region. But conversion was rarely total. In many villages, people blended Christian and Maya beliefs into a hybrid spiritual system. Saints were worshipped alongside old deities. Christian festivals overlapped with agricultural cycles and sacred calendar days. Crosses appeared on altars, but the earth, the sky, and the ancestors still held quiet authority. Language helped keep Maya identity alive. While Spanish was the language of government, law, and trade, most Maya communities continued to speak their native tongues: Yucatec, Quechua, Cacaicol, Cuequi, and many others. Oral storytelling, prayer, and song preserved the rhythms and meanings of earlier times. Even when literacy declined and ancient glyphs were forgotten, the spoken word remained a bridge to the past. This period also saw the rise of Maya resistance movements, often sparked by economic injustice, religious suppression, or excessive tribute demands. One of the most striking examples occurred in the Guatemalan highlands in 1720, where a group of Maya villagers rose up against corrupt officials and clergy. They were defeated, but not silenced. These uprisings reminded the colonial authorities, and the Maya themselves, that resistance was still possible. Throughout the 18th and early 19th centuries, Maya communities continued to adapt. Some became leaders within the church or local government, using those positions to protect their people. Others withdrew further into remote regions, preserving older ways of life. And while cities like Mérida and Guatemala City grew increasingly European in culture and architecture, the countryside remained rooted in older rhythms. The arrival of independence movements in the early 19th century brought a new wave of upheaval. Across Latin America, Spanish colonies began fighting for freedom. Mexico declared independence in 1821. Guatemala followed soon after. But for the Maya, the change in rulers did not bring meaningful relief. In the newly formed republics, the Maya were often seen as obstacles to progress, backward people standing in the way of national development. Land was taken again, this time in the name of modernization. Wealthy elites expanded plantations, and indigenous labourers remained locked in poverty. Political power remained concentrated in the hands of mestizo and European-descended leaders, many of whom saw Maya traditions as outdated or dangerous. In the Yucatan, these tensions exploded into one of the bloodiest chapters of Maya history, the Caste War of Yucatan. Beginning in 1847, this was not just a rebellion, it was a full-scale indigenous uprising. Maya farmers, angry at decades of oppression, high taxes, and forced labor, launched attacks against the colonial elite, burning towns, reclaiming land, and declaring their own territory. At the height of the conflict, the rebels nearly succeeded in taking the entire Yucatan Peninsula. They even established an independent Maya state, centered around the town of Chan Santa Cruz, where a sacred talking cross, believed to speak with divine guidance, served as the spiritual heart of the movement. The war dragged on for over 50 years, with alternating periods of intense violence, negotiation, and uneasy peace. The Maya fighters were skilled at guerrilla tactics, using their knowledge of the dense jungle to their advantage. The Mexican government, meanwhile, struggled to maintain control, often relying on foreign mercenaries or arms to suppress the rebellion. Eventually, by the early 20th century, the Mexican military reasserted dominance. Chan Santa Cruz fell in 1901. The last strongholds of Maya autonomy were dismantled. But the caste war left a deep imprint on the region, culturally, psychologically, and demographically. It was a painful reminder that beneath centuries of imposed rule, a powerful sense of identity and injustice still burned. Yet even after the fighting stopped, the Maya endured. They returned to their villages, resumed farming, and continued to speak their languages, tend their altars, and pass on their stories. The war did not erase their traditions, it confirmed their strength. It showed that even in the face of overwhelming odds, people would fight to preserve who they were. And so, into the 20th century, the Maya stepped forward, not as relics of the past, but as survivors. They had weathered conquest, colonization, forced labor, and civil war. Their great cities might have crumbled. Their kings might have vanished. But their culture, resilient, rich, and evolving, was very much alive. The 20th century brought new hopes and new struggles for Maya communities. After centuries of upheaval, colonialism, and rebellion, many Maya people found themselves caught between the pull of tradition and the pressures of modernization. Roads were built, schools were established, governments promised reform. But for most rural Maya, daily life remained shaped by old challenges: poverty, marginalization, and the constant need to protect their land, language, and identity. In Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador, where Maya populations were strongest, the early 1900s saw sweeping political and economic changes. Revolutionary governments rose to power, promising land reform and indigenous rights. But these promises were often hollow. Large estates remained intact, and government policies tended to favor urban elites and mestizo populations over rural, indigenous communities. Education became a double-edged sword. Public schools were introduced to increase literacy and promote national unity, but that often meant suppressing Maya languages and culture. Children were taught in Spanish, punished for speaking their native tongues, and presented with history books that barely acknowledged their ancestors beyond the ruins left behind. The message was clear: to be modern was to be something other than Maya. Still, change was coming, sometimes from unexpected places. Anthropologists, archaeologists, and linguists from around the world began to show a renewed interest in Maya culture. Not just the ancient ruins, but the living people who still practiced centuries-old customs. Some scholars lived for years in Maya villages, learning the languages, recording oral histories, and helping communities document their traditions. Others worked on deciphering the Maya script, long a mystery since the Spanish burned most of the codices. By the 1980s, major breakthroughs were finally unlocking the meanings of those glyphs. Suddenly, ancient monuments spoke again. Names of long-dead kings. Records of battles. Stories of gods and ancestors. The stone texts scattered across the Yucatan, Guatemala, and Chiapas were no longer silent. For many Maya, this wasn't just an academic breakthrough, it was a return of their own voice. But even as cultural pride began to reawaken, political realities remained harsh. In Guatemala, a decades-long civil war from the 1960s to the 1990s devastated much of the highland Maya population. The war was rooted in land disputes, Cold War tensions, and deep social inequality. Maya villages were often caught in the crossfire, targeted by both guerrilla groups and the military. The most brutal phase came during the early 1980s, under General Efrain Rios Montt. In what human rights groups now recognize as genocide, entire Maya communities were massacred, villages were burned, survivors displaced, and traditional ways of life shattered. Tens of thousands of Maya people were killed. Hundreds of thousands fled their homes, some to refugee camps, others across borders. And yet, again, they endured. In the war's aftermath, a new generation began to rise. Maya intellectuals, teachers, and activists stepped forward to reclaim their identity on their own terms. They fought for land rights, cultural recognition, and education in native languages. Organizations were formed to preserve traditional knowledge, protect sacred sites, and train young people in both ancestral skills and modern tools. Across the region, Maya revitalization movements emerged. People wore traditional clothing with pride, spoke their languages publicly, and organized festivals celebrating ancient rituals alongside modern concerns. Maya midwives continued their practices. Spiritual leaders led ceremonies under the same stars their ancestors watched. In Mexico, the Maya of Chiapas drew global attention in 1994 when the Zapatista uprising erupted on the very day the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, went into effect. Though not exclusively Maya, the Zapatistas included many indigenous voices and called attention to the economic and political systems that had failed rural communities for generations. Their message was clear: progress without justice is no progress at all. Meanwhile, archaeological discoveries continued to reshape how the world viewed Maya history. New technologies, like lidar, a kind of laser mapping from the air, revealed massive ancient cities still hidden beneath forest canopies. Thousands of undiscovered structures. Roadways, canals, entire landscapes reimagined. The story of the ancient Maya was richer and more complex than anyone had guessed. Tourism boomed. Sites like Tikal, Chichen Itza, and Palenque became global destinations. But even this brought mixed results. While tourism created jobs and boosted regional economies, it also raised questions about ownership, exploitation, and authenticity. Many Maya communities called for a greater role in managing heritage sites, and for the benefits of tourism to be shared more fairly. At the same time, Maya artists, poets, filmmakers, and musicians began shaping their own narratives. No longer content to be seen only as keepers of the past, they created new works in Maya languages, stories of love, land, resistance, and identity. Some blended traditional weaving patterns with modern fashion. Others wrote novels or composed songs in their ancestral tongue. Maya culture was not just surviving, it was evolving, confidently. By the early 21st century, millions of Maya people lived across southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and beyond. They were teachers, engineers, farmers, and activists. Some lived in remote villages, others in sprawling cities. Some practiced traditional religion, others were Catholic, Protestant, or secular. Some held tightly to the old ways, while others forged entirely new paths. There was no single Maya experience, only a spectrum of stories bound by a common heritage. Through all of it, the heart of Maya civilization remained surprisingly intact. The planting of maize, the counting of sacred days, the honoring of ancestors. These practices, quiet, humble, powerful, linked past and present in a way few other cultures can claim. Because for the Maya, history is not just something that happened. It's something you live. As the 21st century unfolds, the Maya continue to navigate the space between tradition and transformation. In the hills of Guatemala, the jungles of Chiapas, the villages of the Yucatan, and the towns of Belize, more than 6 million Maya people carry forward a legacy that has never truly been lost, just reshaped, generation by generation. Today's Maya communities are defined not by ruins or rituals alone, but by resilience and renewal. Language, for example, remains a cornerstone of identity. Across Mesoamerica, over 30 Maya languages are still spoken, each tied to a specific region and history. Some, like K'iche', Cuequi, and Yucatec Maya, have hundreds of thousands of speakers. Others are more fragile, spoken by only a few elders. But in many places, efforts to preserve and revitalize these languages are gaining momentum. In classrooms from Guatemala City to rural Quintana Roo, bilingual education programs now teach children in both Spanish and Maya. Radio stations broadcast in indigenous languages. Dictionaries and children's books are being published by and for Maya communities. Language is not only a tool of communication, it's a vessel of memory. A sentence in Kakhaikal or Tzotzil may carry layers of meaning that span centuries. Spiritual life, too, continues in ways both visible and quietly sacred. Traditional Agi-Kuajab, daykeepers, still mark the sacred calendar, conducting fire ceremonies and readings that connect individuals to time, ancestors, and cosmic forces. In Guatemala, sacred altars, sometimes small stone mounds on hillsides or caves, remain important ritual sites. These ceremonies are intimate and profound, tying daily life to the rhythm of the universe. And yet, many Maya today also practice Christianity, often in forms deeply blended with older beliefs. In the town of Santiago Atitlan, for instance, you might find a church where saints are dressed in woven garments and adorned with candles, feathers, and corn. The lines between old and new aren't erased, they're woven together, like the patterns in a traditional huipil. Economically and politically, the Maya continue to face real challenges. Many communities struggle with poverty, limited access to healthcare, and unequal treatment by national governments. Issues like land ownership, mining rights, and deforestation remain deeply contentious, with corporations and governments often clashing with indigenous groups who seek to protect their ancestral territories. Despite these pressures, Maya leaders are increasingly organizing at local and international levels. Grassroots organizations advocate for land rights, environmental protection, and cultural autonomy. Maya scholars and educators are reclaiming their histories, not through the lens of outsiders, but through their own voices. Technology has become a surprising ally in this process. Smartphones, the internet, and social media have allowed Maya youth to connect across borders, share ideas, and build community in new ways. A teenager in Belize might learn traditional weaving from her grandmother while also creating TikToks in Mopan Maya. A poet in Chiapas might write in Tzeltal and share his work online, reaching a global audience. Ancient heritage now lives side by side with modern expression. Art and music continue to reflect this dynamic. Contemporary Maya painters use traditional symbols in modern compositions. Musicians blend marimba and flute with electric guitars and digital beats. Street murals in cities like San Cristobal de las Casas depict Maya heroes and mythic creatures standing tall amid urban sprawl. These are not museums, they are living testaments to a culture that evolves without losing itself. The ancient cities, too, are seeing new life. While many temples and pyramids remain protected archaeological sites, they are also places of prayer and pilgrimage for modern Maya. Ceremonies are held at the base of ruins, honoring both ancestors and the land itself. Tourists come to marvel at the architecture, but for Maya communities, these are not ruins, they are sacred spaces, part of an unbroken relationship with history. And perhaps most importantly, the Maya now tell their own story. For centuries, their history was written by others, Spanish friars, foreign archaeologists, colonial governments. But today, Maya authors, filmmakers, historians, and teachers are reshaping that narrative. They're not asking to be remembered as relics of a lost civilization. They are here, present, and very much alive. From award-winning documentaries in K'iche' to academic texts written by indigenous scholars, from oral history projects in village schools to international conferences on Maya cosmology, their story is no longer buried. It rises, again and again, in each generation. Because for the Maya, The past is not a straight line. It's a cycle, just like their calendars. Time spirals, returning, renewing. The same stars their ancestors studied still move across the sky. The same stories, of maize gods, sacred mountains, and world trees, still echo, passed from voice to voice. And while modern life brings its complexities, it also offers new possibilities. New alliances. New ways to resist, to teach, to grow. There is something quietly powerful in this enduring presence. Not a loud defiance, but a steady heartbeat. A rhythm in the land, the language, the laughter of children who still call themselves Maya. They are not just survivors of a great civilization. They are its continuation. By the time we reach the present, it becomes clear that the Maya are not a relic of the past. They are one of the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth, living and evolving in real time. And while their story stretches back more than 3,000 years, it's not finished. Every day, across villages and cities, highlands and coasts, the Maya continue writing the next chapter. From the outside, it might be easy to see only the ruins. The towering pyramids swallowed by jungle. The glyphs carved into weathered stone. The once mighty cities now preserved behind velvet ropes and ticket booths. But the soul of the Maya world has always lived in its people, in the way they speak, cook, plant, dance, and pray. It lives in small gestures, the grinding of maize on a metate, the careful folding of a cloth around a baby, the whispered blessing before planting seeds. Today, millions of Maya live in Guatemala, Mexico, Belize, and beyond. Many having migrated to the United States and Canada in search of work and opportunity. Wherever they go, they bring their culture with them. In neighborhoods across Los Angeles, Houston, and Chicago, you'll find Maya communities celebrating traditional holidays, speaking K'ish' or Mam, and organizing to support each other across borders. This global diaspora is one of the newest chapters in a long history of adaptation. And like their ancestors who once built floating cities or plotted Venus cycles in stone, modern Maya find ways to adapt to a changing world without forgetting where they came from. Back home, the land still plays a central role in Maya identity. Mountains are not just geological features, they're living ancestors. Rivers are not just water, they are sacred veins of the earth. The land is memory, story, sustenance. And this belief carries real political weight, especially in the face of mining projects, deforestation, and climate change. Many Maya leaders have become environmental activists, not as a separate cause, but as part of their role as stewards of ancestral territory. They argue not just for clean water or air, but for the right to decide how land is used, and how sacred sites are treated. These efforts often face opposition from governments and corporations, but they have gained powerful allies in international indigenous rights movements. In Guatemala, the Maya-led movement for justice after the Civil War has also gained strength. Survivors of the genocide have pushed for recognition, accountability, and reparations. Trials have been held. Testimonies have been recorded. Mass graves have been unearthed and identified. The process is slow and painful, but it is happening. These struggles are not just about the past, they're about dignity in the present. They are about being seen and heard in full humanity, not as footnotes to someone else's history, but as authors of their own. And this extends to education, too. In recent decades, Maya scholars have created their own institutions, from language academies to research centers. They are writing textbooks in indigenous languages, training new teachers, and helping preserve traditional ecological knowledge. Their goal isn't to freeze their culture in time, but to make it stronger, more accessible, and more rooted in today's world. Modern technology plays a role here as well. From social media campaigns in Kakhaikal to online archives of Maya cosmology, digital tools are helping young people engage with their heritage in new ways. YouTube videos explain glyphs. Podcasts share origin stories. Language learning apps help children reconnect with ancestral speech. It's a quiet revolution of cultural reclamation, happening on phones and laptops as much as in classrooms and fields. There's still much work to be done. In many regions, Maya communities continue to face discrimination, underfunded schools, limited healthcare, and lack of political representation. Some are still fighting for basic recognition. But the momentum is changing. The Maya are not waiting to be saved or celebrated. they're asserting their place. Their story is not just ancient. It's ongoing. And its most remarkable feature is not the pyramids, the math, or even the script. It's endurance. The Maya have lived through droughts and wars, conquest and rebellion, disease and displacement. And through it all, they have never stopped being Maya. They are people of the corn, of the stars, of the earth. People of memory and innovation. Of silence and ceremony. Of fierce pride and quiet persistence. When you walk the old plazas of Tikal, or stand at the foot of Chichen Itza's pyramid, or visit a village where the market still opens with a prayer, you're not stepping into the past. You're stepping into a world that never left. The stones remember. But so do the people. And now, with our story gently folded back into the quiet, take a deep breath and let yourself settle. The long journey through the Maya world, its forests, temples, languages, and lives, can finally rest. Picture the jungle at dusk. The soft call of night birds, the hum of crickets, the last golden threads of sunlight falling across old stone. Somewhere in the distance, a cenote glimmers. You can hear water dripping slowly, rhythmically, like the heartbeat of the earth. The ancient cities may be silent now, their plazas empty, their steps worn smooth by centuries. But beneath the silence, memory still breathes. Not as ghosts or ruins, but as quiet echoes of a people who never truly disappeared. Let the sounds of their world blend into your dreams, the whisper of leaves in wind, the rustle of woven cloth, the gentle syllables of a language older than empire. Here, there is no rush. The Maya counted time in centuries, in cycles so vast they make your own day feel feather-light. Let go of your thoughts. Let them float gently into the night air, like incense rising from a sacred fire. You are safe. You are still. And somewhere, the stars will overhead, just as they always have. Close your eyes. The story is done. The dreaming begins.